Welcome back to the Reel Film Chronicles podcast. As always, I'm Nathan.
And I'm Brian.
And in today's episode, we're going to talk about a little film called The Last Duel by one Ridley Scott.
Ridley Scott, The Last Duel, 2021, 152-minute runtime.
She's a beast.
Starring Matt Damon, Adam Driver, and Jodie Comer. I think significantly here, written by also Ben Affleck and Matt Damon, but also Nicole Halfsener. Yeah, and it's been a long time since those two guys have written a movie. I was listening to another podcast a few months ago with an interview with Matt Damon, and I think Ben and Matt had written most of the movie and needed a female perspective and brought Nicole onto the production, and she basically, it's probably fair to say, wrote a third of the script, if not more of it, to bring in that female perspective, which, I mean, we're not going to get into the movie right now, but I think it paid off quite handsomely for them.
Absolutely.
But before we jump into The Last Duel, and I think it's fair to say we'll talk about spoilers throughout right from the beginning. It is what it is. Let's talk about Ridley Scott. And like, for you, where did Ridley Scott enter your radar? Like, do you remember what movie in his filmography that really took notice?
Well, growing up, my family was big into movies. From my grandfather and my mother, it was a big influence. I remember, I may have talked about this before, but during summer vacation, my mom would take me and my brothers and sister to the library, and we'd go downstairs if you went downstairs in the library, in our hometown, to the right, you go up and it's the main library for the adults. Down to the right is the kids section, and then down to the left, there was this magical place. It was all VHS movies that you could borrow from the library. And we would borrow things. We're getting into that age. Obviously Alien and another little film called Blade Runner. They were part of the regular rotation of movies we would go and borrow and watch on summer break.
What's your age range here? Like, what age are you talking about?
In that age range, like mid-teens, maybe early to mid-teens, like 13, 14, 15, 16, somewhere in that kind of range.
Fair.
Obviously, I think Alien and Blade Runner, it was a bit kind of probably mid teenager. We're looking at probably 15, 16. But yeah, I remember like specifically Blade Runner for sure. I remember getting from the library and taking that out and seeing it on the shelf and kicking that VHS, like, those old plastic hard shell cases where you get the rentals in. Yeah. And the library had all these. But yeah, it's like Ridley Scott has really been part of my cinematic journey almost from the beginning,
Yeah.
How about you?
That's interesting. You know what? The thing is, I don't think I knew like the director. I didn't know Ridley Scott when I was watching these movies initially.
Oh yeah, I didn't pay attention to the directors when I was a kid, but now that looking back, I realized like, oh yeah, Alien and Blade Runner and all this stuff were Ridley Scott, and they were part of that journey, right? Without knowing who Ridley Scott was at the time.
Yeah. And I don't remember, like, Blade Runner was such a significant film, but I honestly don't remember the first time I watched it. But I do remember the first time I watched Alien, and it was sometime in high school. I was watching it with the whole family, and this viewing really stuck out to me because, I mean, obviously the movie was great, but if you could rewind in time here a bit, and this is going to be aging us, or this is going to be aging me quite a bit, but we had one of those old, gigantic floor-sitting TVs that was probably only like 27-inch, like a big CRT tube TV.
Oh, yeah.
It has like that wood grain finish, and the thing probably weighed 400 pounds. But it was quite often the case that I'd just be laying down on the floor, have a bunch of pillows while my parents were on the couch. My sister might have been there as well. And we'd watch movies that way. And I remember laying on the floor watching Alien, and it was near the end of the film here, spoilers, where Ridley has made it into the second ship and she's about to escape, and she kind of has escaped the main, the cargo ship that they were using. And she's basically stripping down to her underwear, and that scene goes on for a little bit too long, perhaps to the point where I think my mom wanted to turn the movie off because it's like, this is inappropriate for young Brian to be seeing at this time, right? But we stuck through it, and I mean, it's only a couple minutes long, And I can't imagine having watched that entire movie without that thrilling conclusion at the end of the extra scare of having the alien there, and having them pulled out into the void of space. But that was definitely my first view of Alien. Blade Runner, I remember watching quite a bit, and I think we obviously watched those movies quite a bit in the years since.
So I think even before Alien and Blade Runner, the movie that I'd seen, I didn't know it was Ridley Scott at the time, but I think the movie Legend. If you've seen this,
I've never seen Legend before.
You've never seen it at all?
I've never seen it at all. And yeah, I mean, that's a big admittance, but yeah, there it is. For
everyone listening, Legend. So there's another movie called Legend that came out a couple of years ago, starring Bane, what's his name? Tom Hardy. He plays twin British gangsters. It's a movie called Legend as well.
Yep.
But I'm talking about the 1985 Legend by Ridley Scott. It's this fantasy adventure starring, I think it was the first starring role for Tom Cruise. I think it was his introduction through film. But you had this epic fantasy adventure. Robert Picardo was in there playing the Swamp Witch. You had obviously, this iconic performance of Tim Curry playing the Darkness. I think the creature is credited as, but essentially the giant red devil creature in that. But that one we watched, that one stuck in my mind, and I was able to share that with my kids recently. And I was like, I love that it was this self-contained story. I didn't require any sequels, prequels. I love that it's just this thing that I can go to. Like for me, like Legend and Willow and watching these things. Willow's not by Ridley Scott, obviously, but like having these movies, they're part of my childhood, right? But like Ridley Scott, that Legend, I think was the first movie I might have ever seen by Ridley Scott. Yeah, no, that would be a pretty common introduction, I think. I don't know how that one slipped through my radar. I don't think I watched a lot of fantasy movies like that. Like you talk about Willow. I'd never seen Willow before. The Neverending Story, I kind of put in that same vein. The Dark Crystal, the Labyrinth. I hadn't seen a lot of these movies until quite recently. And what?
I know it's just like, I might be losing all my movie credibility here, but you know what? That's fine. I was happy watching my Godzilla movies in the meantime. No, that's fair. But I grew up watching obviously Legend and Willow and Labyrinth and all like these movies. It's kind of satisfying to me now that, not to validate my own opinions, because like I'm going to love those movies whether or not other people love them or not. That was a really weird double negative. But just to see that, I always love when other people find enjoyment in something that I've found enjoyment in. It's like, I love to have that shared with people, right? It's kind of neat, people kind of rediscovering these films years later, having, it's kind of feels weird to say, but a new generation discovering some of these films. Do your kids like these? Like, did your kids like Legend, and do they like these other ones? Yeah. They're probably not obsessed to it to the degree that I would have hoped. It's a different landscape, I guess. There's a lot more competition in films and going back to something like that. But I was trying to kind of intentionally show them some of these films when they were younger, just to have that kind of same experience that I did, to share that same experience when I was a kid, and I got to go essentially be transported through these films, by Ridley Scott, through a film like Legend, to be transported to this world and to have that. It's still, when I love to write stories, and I'll still think about images from that movie, like almost probably on a weekly basis. I'll think about a shot from that movie, or like the Darkness character from played by Tim Curry to perfection. Like so much of it, like I'll go back and watch this now, and it's like, it's one of those movies where I can watch it like, and I know exactly what's going to happen next. And instead of that, it doesn't make the experience more stale. It makes it like so much more enjoyable, because I'm like waiting for the next part. Like you're going to like squeal with delight because like you're waiting for this guy, say the line. No, you say that line. No, you say that line. Now you do this thing. All right. I'm going to hit you with a question here that I'm not sure that I can answer myself, but say we had the technology that from Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, where we can go in and selectively wipe out your memories, right? And we wiped out your memory for one Ridley Scott film, let's say between Alien, Blade Runner, Legend. Let's escalate that timeline up to Gladiator as well, because I think, at least for me, Gladiator probably is what brought Ridley Scott. It's just like, oh, who's this director? Well, I think we have to mention how big Gladiator was at the time, coming out in 2000.
It was
Yeah.
huge. It ended up winning the Academy Award for Best Picture, which arguably, I don't know if it was deserving of Best Picture. I love the film. Don't get me wrong. Like Gladiator, I love, but like Gladiator really, I think you're correct. Like all of a sudden it's like people were like, oh yeah, Ridley Scott. That's the guy's
Yeah.
name who's directing this. And like Gladiator was this huge epic film. And it felt like for a lot of people in the mainstream who may not have known who this guy's name was, like, oh yeah, that's Ridley Scott who directed this
Yeah.
big epic movie.
So of those 4 movies, like I'm just going to say those 4 because 2000 Beyond, I feel like is a different movie watching era for us. And honestly, I think I was a bit too young to really appreciate some of his 90s material. Thelma and Louise, I didn't see till later. G.I. Jane. I don't think I've still seen that. White Squall as well. I mean, there's a lot of good movies in there, but between those 4 movies, which one would you delete from your brain so that you can go back and rewatch it absolutely fresh again?
For the first time? Oh my goodness. Oh, that's a tough one. I mean, my first instinct is potentially Alien.
Yeah.
Because that's kind of like when you think of horror movies and horror movies that really like change the game and like really define the genre, and you have really influenced other filmmakers going forward. I mean, Alien is just such a classic film, and to see that, like, you know, spoilers, I guess, for a film from, was it 1979? Was that when it was released? But like that chest burster scene for one thing, that came out of like really, like Ridley Scott when he's on points, when he's at the top of his game, he's unmatchable, right? Like he's one of those guys who's just like one of those people who's just unmatchable in his skill. And Alien, I think, yeah, as much as I love Legend and I love Blade Runner as well and the world it created. Yeah, I think Alien is kind of like one of those things, like seeing it for the first time and getting that experience. And yeah, I think that would be amazing to feel that again. How about you? What would your pick be?
Yeah, I think for myself, my initial thought was Blade Runner. And for all the same reasons, I would love to re-experience Alien again for the first time. But Blade Runner, I think, had I don't want to say a more influential take on like a lot of the movies that I came to love, like that sort of that neo-noir, like cyberpunk style that I really like. I delved fully into that in movies in the 90s, especially. Alien, I mean, I think I always had a love for sci-fi before Alien. Sci-fi horror, like Alien was just, it was mind-boggling. I mean, both movies are a toss-up for wanting to experience them for the first time. And I'm kind of jealous of future generations and current generations who are these people who are watching them for the first time. Maybe they don't know Ridley Scott in the same way because they're just getting into movies now, or they've only been exposed to some of his more recent films. But go back and see like the origins of some of these things that are like literally creating genres of movies that have spawned 40 years of clones and homages and everything.
Oh yeah. Well, you look at even something like Thelma and Louise, which I don't necessarily think gets as much attention these days. Yeah. But it's so, you see it spoofed so much. I know there were scenes in like The Simpsons that I knew they were from Thelma and Louise even before I'd seen the movie, because I didn't see Thelma and Louise until really like maybe 5 years ago or something. So kind of later in life. But yeah, it's like it's permeated our culture to the point where like you get those references even without having seen the movies. Right? It's so like his movies, like the top ones, are so ingrained in the culture. It's like you understand the reference without even having to see the movie, right?
Yeah. Really incredible. It was interesting. Remind me to try and get you a copy of that little documentary about the making of Alien, and it really focused on the chestburster scene. And it was literally, it was almost like I walk away with the sense that we're giving almost too much credit to Ridley Scott, because the entire Alien movie was built around this one scene. Like the script, everything was created. Like some guy that forgive me, I forget the name. He thought of the scene and how amazing it would be. And basically the movie and the screenplay was built around that. I mean, obviously Ridley Scott comes in and like was able to create that atmosphere and adapt that screenplay beautifully and then add his own touches. But like the entire movie was based on that one thing. And I think it's interesting that Ridley Scott goes back to that numerous times. Like he's done Alien, Covenant and Prometheus, and I think they both feature kind of different versions of the chestburster scene because it was that significant, right? Everyone knows that scene now. It might be impossible to watch Alien without having that knowledge of that if you're in pop culture knowledge at all.
Yeah. Well, it's really interesting. I'd happened to see, I think it was a YouTube video, but somebody was breaking down the lighting in a couple scenes in Alien. One of them I think was like Ripley's escape at the end there when she sets to self-destruct and the ship's counting down. But somebody who's talking about like the lighting before the alien attacks and the lighting after the alien attacks, and like how they're actually like literally like spraying like reflective paint on surfaces to get the lighting that they're wanting. And it's like all these little things you don't think about as a layperson, but you notice kind of subconsciously or unconsciously in creating this scene and how lighting plays an effect. Like it's like you don't give enough credit to like directors like Ridley Scott who have this singular vision and who understand how to light a scene, how to shoot a scene, like which lenses to use in a scene and how to shoot a scene properly. But like you're saying, the teamwork of all the people collaborating to tell this story, right? Unified under a singular vision, but it does take this team. And that's why like Alien is it seems so straightforward and it seems like an easy story to tell, but the way it's told and it's like the subtle nuances in there to build suspense. It's just like Alien is, as much as I love his other early work, and I do love his early work. Alien is still like a masterclass. And it's like, that was one of the movies I watched during my Halloween marathon this year. I think Aliens is one of those ones. It's almost like a mandatory yearly viewing, right?
They really are. Yeah. And I guess fast forwarding that's, I mean, for us, I really fell in love with cinema in like 2000 and plus. I mean, we mentioned Gladiator. After that, there's a string of fairly big movies. Hannibal, like a follow-up to Silence of the Lambs. Love it or hate it, Hannibal exists out there. Black Hawk Down, which I think, I don't know, it's one of my favorite films. It was very significant at the time. Did we go see that at the theater? Like, I remember seeing it in the theater.
Yeah, we did. And I'm still lukewarm on that. I have to go back and rewatch it because I always remember you loving that film, and then you bought it and we watched it. And I was like, I don't get the appeal. I think it's one of those movies I have to go back and kind of watch to get maybe an appreciation of, but you don't have to love everything he's done.
No, for sure.
Was
and
not
if
my
you
cup of
can
tea.
get the 4K of that movie, man, that movie looks great in 4K. It came out a few years ago. Next up, Matchstick Men. I think that was Nicolas Cage, right? That should be on your watch list if you haven't seen it already.
It is. I haven't seen it yet, but it's on my watch list.
Kingdom of Heaven.
I was going to say, like, watching The Last Duel, like, I wanted to go back and rewatch Gladiator and Kingdom of Heaven and Robin Hood. There's just something about a Ridley Scott medieval epic that is just like the way he shoots it. Everything seems so visceral. Everything seems so epic. Yeah, it's pretty. As I was watching The Last Duel, completely different movies than Kingdom of Heaven or Robin Hood. But I was watching The Last Duel. I was like, I have the itch to watch Kingdom of Heaven now for sure, and watch Robin Hood because like just the action scenes and it's like the texture of like what's going on in the scene, like the set design and the costumes and everything. It just pulls you right into the film, right?
Without a doubt. And you have to watch. I mean, you're probably aware, but if you're not, or viewers are not aware, Kingdom of Heaven director's cut is the version you need to see. The other one has been trimmed down to a point where I know I've seen the theatrical cut, but I've seen the director's cut more often that I can't remember the differences, but it's such a richer film in the director's cut. And you mentioned Robin Hood, like, man, Ridley Scott's got an eye for medieval drama and action and the whole nine yards. Like, Robin Hood is a good one. And of course, he's paired up with Russell Crowe again. And you're thinking, this is going to be fantastic. I'm pretty sure we went to see Robin Hood in theaters, and I was probably a bit let down, but I think it was that echo of Gladiator. I wanted another Gladiator-sized film. It's not that, but it's still a very good movie. And right after Robin Hood comes up with the divisive Prometheus, a return of Ridley Scott to the Alien franchise, which is more of a prequel. Where do you land on the Prometheus love-hate scale?
I don't love it, but I don't hate it. I thought it was a solid movie. I like Prometheus more than I liked Alien Covenant. I think Alien Covenant got a bit more, I don't know if it was like self-indulgent indulgent or a little bit maybe wrapped up in itself. But Prometheus I really enjoyed. And then Alien Covenant, I was kind of, I have to go back and rewatch it. It is, I don't know. It feels also unfinished because it feels like the way they left it off, it feels like he wanted to do another trilogy.
Well, here's my take on it. Prometheus, I'll be upfront. I love this since the first day I saw it in theaters. I love the film. I love the atmosphere of it. I love the way it's shot. I love the mystery surrounding it. I don't necessarily love, trying to explain the origins of the aliens, but I really enjoy like the xenomorphs specifically. I didn't really care one way or another. I just love the film. And Alien Covenant did feel a little cheap to me. Like it doesn't, to me, that was not his original vision.
Yeah.
And I think, as you point out, it's like there was going to be another trilogy that Ridley Scott created. And I think with the negative reaction on Prometheus, he created Alien Covenant as a response to that and created a mediocre film because of it, because of that general audience reaction. I think I don't know, maybe this is too much. Feels like the production succumbed to those pressures a bit, and we got what we got, to a point where a third film is probably still up in the air and just may never happen anymore. These are just going to be footnotes in the Alien franchise world.
Yeah, it feels a shame. I mean, if you're looking at ranking it in terms of the Alien franchise, like I think they're both better than was it Alien Resurrection?
Yeah, that's the fourth one.
It's the fourth one. I don't even remember the name of that one. They're both, Alien Resurrection flew at the deep end. It was not great.
Well, now you just made me think. Alien Resurrection number 4, Matrix Resurrection number 4.
Don't even.
Don't go there.
I have such high hopes for Matrix Resurrections. But also Ridley Scott, there was a couple other movies that I think get overlooked. One is American Gangster.
Yes.
Again, Russell Crowe and Denzel Washington in there. Neat little gangster flick. I think it gets kind of, I don't know why it was overlooked, but Ridley Scott with gangsters and things like, this is a perfect pairing actually in terms of subject matter. Great little flick based on a true story. And then another one I think got a bit more play, but Body of Lies.
I don't think I saw that one, honestly.
It is a great little flick too. I was pleasantly surprised. I don't know why I'm keep being pleasantly surprised by Ridley Scott films, who's one of the most prolific filmmakers of our time. And I'm surprised when he makes a great film. But Body of Lies, I think if you haven't seen it, again, check it out. They weren't like the genre defining big name Ridley Scott stuff, but still great films in their own right.
Without a doubt. The Martian, you and I went to see that in theaters. I mean, that's a good film. Yeah, really, really good. All the Money in the World. It was solid. Realize, this is, to me, All the Money in the World forms a mark where I didn't realize Ridley Scott was making these movies. It's almost like the marketing has removed him off the name of a lot of this stuff. Like All the Money in the World definitely was overshadowed, I think, in terms of press and publicity because of the creep Kevin Spacey being completely replaced in the movie, right? Which when you watch the movie, you're like I know they reshot a few things, but this is like his character. They basically just replaced him. And bam, you wouldn't even notice in the film. With
Christopher Plummer and speaking to, I think that's a good point because a lot of the dialogue was about Kevin Spacey and how rightfully he was, based on the charges of sexual assaults and all that kind of stuff and just terrible all around actions. But what Ridley Scott was able to do essentially, was 2 or 3 months before this movie was distributed to theaters, he went back in and refilmed a bunch of scenes with one of the key characters in the movie, and it was seamless. And people were kind of breaking that down and saying, any other director, this is just impossible to do. But Ridley Scott comes in and he has that experience and he has that knowledge and he has that clear vision, and he's able to come in and knock this out like an impossible task. And he does without pushing the release date back in a crazy, a couple month schedule. It's insane to think about what he was able to do on that movie because of those challenges. But you just don't get that level of, I think people don't understand behind the camera, behind the scenes, what that experience actually means in terms of creating that final product and creating that vision. Right.
It absolutely bananas. And I mean, it was a decent film at the end. I don't think it was that significant, but it was still a solid film.
Yeah.
And that brings us kind of up to The Last Duel. because All the Money in the World came out in 2017. I see a couple other credits here, but nothing I recognize. And then The Last Duel, which, I mean, is a 2021 film. It was probably slated a bit earlier. I think it was filmed, but if I recall correctly from the Wikipedia article I read this morning, it was filmed. I got a short-term memory here, right? Don't expect too much.
This is the quality research you get with Reel Film Chronicles. You got Wikipedia.
Exactly. Where else can you go now? The Last Duel was filmed between February and October of 2020. So it's like probably 2 or 3 months of actual filming postponed due to the COVID pandemic. They came back, wrapped up filming, and then a full year later, we get it in theaters where it absolutely bombs. Like, this movie did not make money. And Ridley Scott, as a result, has been in the press due to some controversial statements, I think, where he's kind of blaming millennials for not getting off their phones and going out to see 2.5-hour movies in the theater, right?
Yeah, the problem too is I think The Last Duel, like, what's the studio that released it? Wasn't it like
Come on, I didn't research that far.
I think it was the former Fox 20th Century, wasn't it? 20th Century Fox?
This is the 20, yeah.
So I think another thing people are saying too, I don't know if Ridley Scott had pointed this out, but that because Disney owns this studio now, and like The Last Duel was released under the 20th Century division, but like Disney's pushing for, I think, either Shang-Chi or the Eternals for like an Oscar push, and they're kind of burying, like, you didn't see the same advertising for The Last Duel that you had for the Eternals, and it's like they're obviously spending their marketing budgets in a different way, right?
I mean, honestly, like, the first time I heard about this was about 2 or 3 months ago in a Mark Maron podcast interview with Matt Damon, where he's talking about The Last Duel. And I have to stop and look this up. It's like, what is The Last Duel? And it's like, oh my gosh, this $100 million budget Ridley Scott film. And it's written by Matt and Ben Affleck and this other lady, starring all these actors. And it comes out like in a couple weeks. Where did this movie come from? It's just, it is kind of criminal. It really got nowhere.
Not to be dismissive of like Ridley Scott, I think he's like a 70-something-year-old man. So, and he's been known for being very opinionated in interviews.
Yes.
So like, I don't agree with him and everything he's saying in terms of why his analysis of why the movie bombed. But I think looking at the quality of the film and the general kind of praise that it's gotten from critics and audiences, I think there's an obvious disconnect here. And I think partially that has to do with the way that the studio handled its release, and part of it with the marketing. I think that it's been a lot of the online dialogue kind of trying to reconcile, like, you see audiences and critics are giving it generally favorable reviews and saying like, this is not just a good film, but like an important film in terms of the kind of social issues that it's tackling. And then kind of seeing how it's failing at the box office and trying to kind of, there was going to be people in the industry trying to figure out, obviously for different reasons, but reconcile why that is the way it is, or why that box office didn't quite match the critical response it's gotten. But it is kind of a shame that you get something like this that is a really good movie, really well written, acted, and directed, and it it fails miserably in terms of box office returns. And it's kind of, it's frustrating, right? When you have studios who are already risk averse and they're thinking in terms of ROI, like return on investment, like to maybe a bit more extended in these uncertain times with COVID, right? Where it's like market volatility, we want to reduce risks, so we're not going to take as many risks narratively. And then you see a movie that takes more risks, talking about things that are a bit more sensitive, tackling real social issues, and it falls on its face. It doesn't get the audience reception, doesn't get the financial response it needs to kind of encourage studios to keep releasing these kinds of movies or taking those kinds of chances. It is kind of, I understand the frustration and why Ridley Scott is waving the angry old man waving his fist at the millennials. I get the frustration and why he feels the need to try and get this out there, right?
Right. And I feel like I should be taking to my social media, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to do a podcast episode about it, is just saying, you got to go out and see this movie. I mean, it's out on home video now. You can go grab it rent it digitally, whatever. You just got to check this movie out. Give it the due it deserves. This is a really good film. But before then, I just want to lay out the numbers here.
Okay.
We mentioned $100 million budget. Okay. It makes about $10.8 million domestically. That's US. And about $30.5 million worldwide. I mean, if this was any other year and it wasn't the pandemic and like box office numbers are totally thrown out the window, this would be in the press so often as a gigantic bomb. But I can't help but think, because of the reasons you outlined, especially with the marketing and whatnot, being diverted to other Disney productions, this would have been a bigger film, I think. An easy $150, $200 million box office. In any event, this movie is very well regarded by critics. Rotten Tomatoes has it at an 85% rating.
Nice.
Metacritic is down at about 67%. Letterboxd is about 3.8 average user rating, and IMDb, and I think a very healthy 7.5 out of 10.
Yeah.
So this movie is well regarded, and I think it will find its legs in the long run on home releases and whatnot. Especially, this is the thing with having someone like Ridley Scott behind the production of this movie. People are going to discover his other movies and start going through his filmography. And maybe 10, 15 years down the road, someone's going to be watching The Last Duel as one of the last movies and like part of his filmography. Like, wow, this guy never stopped making quality films, right? Really, really good.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. Like people like Ridley Scott and Martin Scorsese still like on fire in their 70s and 80s, still putting out just insane film. Like not only like quality of film, but like Ridley Scott has 2 films out in 2021. He had this, he had The Last Duel, and then he had House of Gucci, which isn't getting as good reviews, but it's like just still to have that output, to have that work ethic and have that energy at 70, 75, 80. It's like
he was born in 1937.
1937. That's crazy. But like to have that kind of energy and enthusiasm for his work still, like that's, to me, that's amazing.
King Charles VI declares that knight Jean de Carouge settle his dispute with his squire by challenging him to a duel. Based on real life events of quote unquote the last duel, one of the last formal duels, I guess, in medieval France, this movie basically has Matt Damon playing Jean, Adam Driver, Jacques Legris, and Jodie Comer, essentially fighting a duel to the death as a response to Matt Damon's wife, Jodie Comer, Marguerite, accusing Jacques of rape, and they settle it in a proper court appointed last duel. I mean, basically, Matt Damon's character requests a duel with Adam Driver. They go in front of, is it the king at the time? Like it goes through the system up to the king. He has to approve it, King Charles. And they basically have this duel to the death, which is bananas. But the movie is told in such a unique way that really grabbed my attention, where it's 3 different perspectives, right? Yeah. The movie, it starts off from
Sir Jean de Carouge.
Yeah. It starts off from his perspective. And it's kind of, a series of events that lead up to the duel. And then it goes into Adam Driver's Jacques' perspective. It's interesting because you see same events told out slightly differently. Like they each go to a battle. They're sharing a battle field. And in one perspective, one guy saves the other guy's life, and the other perspective, it's kind of the opposite thing. And you're like, okay. And then the third act is Jodie Comer's perspective, Marguerite's perspective of the events. And then we basically get down to the brass tacks of the actual duel at the finale of the film.
Yeah. So I love the title cards on this, where it's like the truth according to Jean de Carouge, and then like the next one is like the truth according to Jacques Legris, and then the truth according to Marguerite de Carouge. But like it's interesting, even the title cards setting up these perspectives, right? It was like the truth according to. It's like they're really cognizant of perspective on the story. And it's a pretty heavy story because the whole thing centers around the rape of Marguerite, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is, I think this is a movie that I think you can trace a direct line between the Me Too movement from a couple of years ago to this movie getting made, where you see, obviously, I think most listeners understand, the Me Too movement going forward, where like all those allegations of sexual harassment, sexual assault, specifically in the entertainment industry and the movie industry came to light. Then you had people like Harvey Weinstein and Bill Cosby, who were sexually assaulting / raping people over a long period of time.
Mm-hmm.
Finally there was some justice done, but like the Me Too movement was it was a starting point or another step on the road, obviously bringing to light a lot of these issues that I know, speaking for myself from an honest point of view, I knew that there were issues and challenges that women still faced today, and specifically revolving around sexual harassment and sexual assault. But really, when those conversations started happening with the Me Too movement, I don't think even I wasn't really aware of how pervasive this stuff actually was in society, and how like that anxiety and that fear that women have to face on a daily basis that I just took for granted that I never had to. And I knew like some of the stuff where like I never had to worry about going out to bars and worrying about accepting drinks from people.
Mm-hmm.
I was never taught about like, you don't have to worry about date rape or like walking through an empty parking lot to your car. You worry a little bit, but it's like, I don't think I really realized or really understood until people started coming forward and telling their stories.
Just how prevalent it was. I mean, you said it exactly right there. It's like you kind of have something in the back of your head for this stuff and an awareness, but you don't realize like everyone you knew, all the women you knew growing up and everything have dealt with these different issues to varying degrees. And it's just like, we have really had this one perspective of this male privilege that we've been able to enjoy for so long.
Yeah.
And really, I mean, quite glad that this is coming out and I'm able to see these different perspectives on it. And I'm able to get this increased knowledge and these things, these accusations and allegations, these actual events. Everyone can learn that this stuff was happening and it's really friggin' awful. Like, I feel bad that I've loved movies and the entertainment industry for so long. I didn't really know how deep all this stuff went. I don't really pay attention to some of all the gossip and celebrity drama and stuff, but like this stuff goes beyond gossip and whatnot. But it seems like it was kind of treated that way for a long time. Like you go back and watch some sound bites and interviews from like the 90s and 2000s and see people kind of like hinting at these events, like especially with Weinstein. And you're thinking, man, this is awful. Like, I'm kind of ashamed to have enjoyed these movies as much as I did, knowing now that this stuff has been going on. It's brutal.
Yeah. And it's just one of those things where like we kind of had an idea, but we didn't understand really how pervasive it was. And we're still learning more and more. So I think like this movie, putting it in the context of, the Me Too movement and that growing social awareness as we as a society and we as men specifically kind of understanding more and more what these issues are, and understanding too that's not just in the entertainment industry, that in the workplaces that we're involved in, some of this stuff is happening. A lot of this stuff is happening all around us. Yeah. And maybe we weren't turning a blind eye to it, but maybe we weren't tuned in or aware that this was even a signal that this was happening. Right.
Yeah.
So
exactly.
The Last Duel is really playing into that, where it focuses around the key plot point here is Marguerite de Carouge being raped by Jacques Legris, but putting that whole thing in a larger context of, it wasn't just the fact that she was raped, but the larger context of, even though she was, married to Jean de Carouge, she was still treated like an object, right? She was the value of women in medieval times. And it was brought up quite clearly. There was even that scene with the horse being mounted by the other horse, which was a scene I never thought I'd see in a mainstream movie, but it's like really drive home the point with that imagery that even Jean de Carouge, who's like the quote unquote good guy defending his wife's honor, is like, he's kind of defending his wife's honor, but he's more defending his own property, because he sees his wife as a baby maker, somebody who's going to produce an heir for him, and that's like her primary job. So even in the larger context of like not good guys and bad guys, but society at large demeaning women and objectifying them, and then even like the whole thing like at the trial where she's already had to suffer through this rape, but then they're asking her these really demeaning questions about whether she's like orgasming or experiencing pleasure during sex. Because like, oh, you can't get pregnant unless you orgasm. They call it le petit mort, which is the little death, which is actually what they called it. I don't know if they called it that back then, but that's actually a French term for an orgasm, is le petit mort, the little death. But asking these like humiliating questions in public, in the public trial, when it goes to trial, and seeing that the parallels to modern society, and seeing like in a lot of ways we've come a lot further as a society, but in a lot of ways we've remained stagnant for 300 or 400 years. And it's like some of the things like slut shaming and victim blaming, these are not new phenomena. Like we're aware of them now more, but like that mindset, essentially we're still operating like medieval software, like on some of our systems here.
Yeah, that's a really good analogy. Really good points. Like this movie takes place around a decade or so, 1570, I believe. Is that right?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. So it takes place around 1570. And that was one of the laws at the time, is that rape is not a criminal act. It's only a criminal act because it's a violation of another man's property.
Yeah.
And it's just like, yeah, man, brutal, just brutal. And it's like 500 years have passed and we're still treating women in the same way in a lot of these cases. It's really, just really brutal.
Yeah.
That last section, like her perspective was very difficult to watch. The entire court scene there where they're just asking her all these things. And it's based on these different beliefs at the time that it's just, they have no qualms. And it's not like these men are asking her questions and like being sick about it. It's just like, they really do not look at this woman like a person.
Yeah.
And I think the actors did a really good job of presenting that. It's just like, there's no guilt in their faces at all when they're asking her these embarrassing personal questions. And then her husband, he doesn't care at all either, right?
Well, it's depicted as like he was a man of his time. And it's interesting, in his own story, he's not depicted as super loving, but he depicts it when the truth according to Jean de Carouge comes, and that's Matt Damon. It's like he heard of the rape, and he's not like super affectionate towards her, but he does give her like a hug. And he's like, I'm going to defend your honor. But you can still see it's clear that he's not super caring about what she wants. But then in her perspective, the truth according to Marguerite, he like grabs her by the throats and is threatening, is like, you better be telling the truth about this guy, right? This is not a small matter to make. And he's like questioning her. It's like automatic. And you see that parallel in today when victims of sexual assault come forward and nobody believes them out of the gate. It's one of those weird things, like of all the crimes, for some reason, sexual assault is the one people push back on all the time. It's like, oh, well, are you sure? Or like, oh, what were you wearing? And like all the victim blaming kind of stuff, right? Yeah. And then even after that, after the rape, she tells him that, and he believes her. And he's like, but she has no legal standing. So she's like, I need you in courts. Because as a woman, I have no legal standing in the legal system at the time. I need you as my husband to do this. And he's like, I'll agree because I'm going to defend your honor. And it's like, I'm not going to have this man make a mockery or like essentially steal my property. And then he's like, no, get into bed. We're going to have sex right now. And she's like, but like, she suffered this terrible trauma, specifically related. It's a sexual trauma. It's like, no, I'm not going to have this guy be the last man to have known you. And just like, you can see, he's like, he cares more about, it's like, and I think he actually says like, how could he do this to me? Right. Like Sir John is saying, like, how could Jacques have done this to me? Which is like, you know, like obviously like she's the actual victim, right? Marguerite is the actual victim. She had this perpetrated, but you see that recontextualization, and like I think it was done in such a way is like, it was clearly drawing parallels to, you know, modern conceptualizations to kind of shine that light or show that mirror. It's like, oh, maybe we're still like there's obviously some people who directly harbor those beliefs still, but maybe we're doing that in ways that we don't even understand, that we're in certain ways that we're perpetuating some of these things, right? Like heavy stuff, right? It's an incredible movie to watch, but like the subject matter is like, and that rape scene, and they show it twice. And I think it's difficult to watch both times, but it's necessary to see. I like how the changes in the perspectives, they weren't wildly different. But just the way that that rape scene was shot from the perspective of Jacques and then from the perspective of Marguerite, and just like subtle differences, but just made it all the more horrifying from Marguerite's perspective.
Well, yeah, like in Jacques' perspective, he's basically, and there's a lot of scenes building up to it where she looks over at him a few times at different like public events and stuff. So he's thinking we have an attraction towards each other. And really it's just her being nice because she's playing it politically, right? She has basically zero interest in this guy, but she looks over at him while and she's dancing with her husband. And he's looking at it from his perspective is like, oh, she's smiling at me. She's talking to him, but she's like really talking with her eyes to me. And then to the point where he basically enters her house under false pretenses. You know, she trips going up the stairs. She loses her shoes, but she takes off her shoes. But in her perspective, she trips going up the stairs and loses her shoes as a result of the tripping. Yeah. Because she's trying to get away from this guy who is imposing upon her. And it's just like the same event happens where she trips up the stairs. Yeah. And they're played out in different perspectives. It's just like, these are how they're remembering.
But I like there was that moment where there was that reconciliation because Jean and Jacques, they had been like friends, and then there was like political things going on, and they had a falling out, and there was that festival you're talking about, and that get together, and they came together and shook hands and kind of like mended bridges, doing the dance, and like Jacques looking over is like, oh, she's smiling at me because he feels really attracted to her, and he thinks she feels the same. But then you hear from when it's her turn to tell the story, she's talking to her husband, Jean, and she's just like, yeah, you smile at him. If you're nice to people, instead of threatening them, because Jean de Carouge, he wasn't a very subtle person. It's like if he felt wronged, he would tell people, he was like, no subtlety, no political maneuvering. And she was just like, no, if you're nice and you treat people, like use that kindness as kind of kind of a weapon or a tool, right? So she was just using that just like, essentially just like, no, like I don't like this guy. But I think that plays into, you see kind of parallels in Jacques Legree's reasoning in the incel movement, right? Where you think people are like, men specifically think that they're owed sex or owed that sexual attraction by women, right? It's like, of course, it's like that self-centered thing. It's like, yeah, of course, like she owes me, of course, I'm a man, she's a woman, she owes me this sex, right? Or you see like, I love there's a parallel scene earlier in the movie with Jacques Legree, that's Adam Driver, and then with Ben Affleck's character there, Pierre d'Alençon, but they're having like, Pierre is a philanderer, he's married to, his wife is pregnant, and then after the party, Ben Affleck and Adam Driver are having that big orgy, but they're chasing the woman around the table. It's like, oh, like I know, like, oh, you're playing a game, right? But then when he goes to rape Marguerite, she's like, she has a table between them. It's almost an exact mirror of that scene where he's looking at it as almost like kind of a game.
Like she's just playing hard to get or something. Yeah. And it's a game for him.
And this kind of reasoning, and you see that parallel in a lot of reason for rapists in modern day. It was like, oh, she was playing hard to get, or the way she was dressed, or the way she was looking at me. Of course she wanted it. How was I supposed to know? Even though the whole time in her version, in both versions, she's saying, no, I'm going to scream, get out of here.
Well, that's the thing. It's like, even in his version, his perspective, she's saying no repeatedly, but from his perspective, the no is just a game. But from her perspective, it's like, no, she doesn't want this. And you know, it's crazy that it's like we're talking about consent in modern day, and it's like we have to keep driving this home to people. Yeah. It's like why aren't these guys just getting like the point? You know, consent is needed, and if it's no, that it just means no, and it's just like maybe it's a playful no. It still means no at this point. Like you really have to be on the same page, and this is a perfect example of it. It's like, this is happening in the 1500s, but these type of events are happening now, right? I mean, that's what makes this movie so relevant.
The kind of medieval mentality where even when Jacques is talking to Pierre afterwards, because Pierre is like kind of like the lord of the region. Mm-hmm. He's like he's high up in the courts. He's cousin to the king, and Jacques goes to him and like Pierre's like, yeah, I mean, there's allegations coming out, so like, but honestly, tell me, like, because they're friends at this point. It's like, did you rape her? It's like, no. I mean, I love how he says, not love it, but it's interesting how he says, It's like, yeah, she put up the usual protests.
Yes,
but,
that's right.
But it wasn't rape. It was consensual. So like, it was interesting from his perspective that he didn't even view it as rape because of how he was, the society in which he was and how they viewed women. So he wasn't like the evil villain of the story. He was a rapist, obviously. He's not a good guy, but it wasn't like, oh, this guy's an evil person who did these things. Like, no, he's part of, it's symptomatic of the larger social context of how people viewed women. And to see like in his own mind is like, I didn't rape her. Like she was just like, you know, it was this flirtatious kind of fun thing that I was doing with other women too. It's like, even up until the very end in that last duel, the titular last duel, and like Jean de Carouge is asking him in the middle of the fight, is like, did you admit your guilt? It's like, I didn't do it, I didn't rape her. It's like, and you see the belief, and it's like he doesn't actually believe that he did anything wrong. It's interesting to get that perspective, right?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I mean, we sort of talk about good villains in media as not knowing that they're villains.
Yeah.
Like what they believe is true for them. And it's just like, this is a really good example where it's just like, he truly believes he hasn't done anything wrong. And that makes that last duel, forgive me, but that much more compelling, because it's like he's not like twisting his mustache and being like, oh, I'm going to get away with this. We're going to go to a duel. And he's pretty confident going into that duel. Like, I'm going to wipe the floor with this guy. And it's not like that. It's just like he's doing this because he has to. Like this is how their court system works. It's like he can't refuse this type of
and it was about
contest.
Again, it was about kind of clearing his name, because he's given a choice, because I think it was revealed that he studied for a while to be part of the clergy, but he's like, the church wasn't for him, kind of wink, wink, nod, nod, because he's a bit of a hedonist. He's got a reputation as a ladies' man, along with Ben Affleck's character Pierre. But he's like, the church gave him a way out. It's like, oh, like we'll go through the courts, the church courts, and they're pretty lenient on these kind of charges. Cause like he's talking to the priest at one point. It's like, yeah, these charges come up all the time in the church. Again, another nod to obviously all the rape and sexual assault that went on in the Catholic Church. That's still going on, unfortunately. But he's like, yeah, we'll get a way out. And then Jacques is like, no, I want to clear my name. I don't just want to run and hide and go through a legal loophole. It's about honor for me. And the whole time it's like, again, all this focus on the men and their names and their reputation, and Marguerite and the women are these secondary considerations, even though they're the ones who have been wronged, or it's their story that's really being told, right?
One of the most heartbreaking story threads in this is Marguerite's best friend, and I forget the name of the character and the actress, but they go about town and they tell each other everything. They're best friends. When all these accusations and events go down, her friend turns on her, and it's just like, how could you do this to these husbands of ours? Like, this is disgusting. It's like, why would you it was almost like, why would you allow yourself to be raped, right? It's like, this has to be another perspective on current events where, like, even if you go to your friends, like, they are not truly your friends. They don't believe you. Like, they believe you're ruining the status quo and like upsetting the balance of like power and their reality, really. I
think it's an interesting point to make that misogyny is not the realm of men, right? Unfortunately, that there are women who are, socially programmed, depending on their setting, they buy into this as well. So you have other women who are, well, why did you dress that way? Why did you look at him that way? Like, well, you said he was attractive. You said you liked him and all this, which is what because they did talk about how attractive Adam Driver was, which I can't disagree. I mean, he is a good looking dude, but it's like, but all this reasoning, and you see it, it's so crazy to see all these things. Like, essentially it's like it could be ripped from headlines today. The social commentaries, I don't want to say it's on the nose because that has a negative connotation, but it's so relevant today. It does it in such an amazingly poignant way.
Exactly. It's very relevant, but it is masterfully crafted. I mean, Ridley Scott does a great job of this. I'm sure there's a whole crew behind him. All the actors, Matt, Adam, Jodie, Ben Affleck. I mean, the trio of them are doing such good jobs here.
Absolutely. I think some of the other female actors as well You see when Marguerite is giving her testimony or telling her stories, you see the queen, the look on her face.
Yes.
When they keep cutting to her and she's like, you see like the women, like they know, they look at her and it's like, when she has to answer these embarrassing questions or like when her life is on the line in this duel, like she realized like, oh, if my husband dies, I'm going to get burned at the stake, because like essentially like their viewpoint is like, whoever wins the duel, that means God has chosen them. So that means that they were telling the truth. This weird backwards kind of reasoning, right?
And yeah, the queen, I think this is a detail I kind of keep forgetting. How old is King Charles VI here? He's looks like a young teenager.
He is a teenager
in
this
the
time.
film. And it's like, I assume his queen is probably a similar age, maybe a bit older. I'm not sure, but you're right. During all those scenes, like he is bored out of his mind, right? He does not care.
Well, what they didn't touch on in the film, they didn't have time, but like King Charles, what is it, the 6th? I think it is.
Yeah.
But he was known as a mad king later on. I think that was documented. He did some pretty questionable stuff later on, but it was documented. People looking back is like, there was documentation of mental illness. He would have been diagnosed today, but yeah, he was not like mentally in a good state. A, he was very young, and B, he had some mental health issues going on that would have not have been diagnosed back then. So he was like known as a mad king, historically later on.
And those reactions from his wife, the queen, you're thinking, oh, she's going to step in and help this lady out. I mean, this obviously never happens. It's just, it can't happen. That's not how they're built.
Even as the queen, she's the queen.
Yeah, she can't do
There's
anything.
nowhere higher, like essentially the king and queen. That's where the buck stops. But she's a queen. But as a woman, she still can't step in and do this. How powerless she is, and it's like that's so eye opening. Just to see the reactions, like I can't remember the actor's name. I got to look it up because she did a great job too. And there's a couple other women in the court, and at some of these discussions, and you see the look on their face, and it's like as they're asking Marguerite these questions, they know exactly what's going on. Yeah.
It's so brutal. Because they say, oh, if your husband loses this duel, you're going to be burned. And you don't really realize it during the duel. When they say that they're going to be burned, she's going to get burned right away. Like she is in chains. She's in shackles on this giant platform. You're thinking, oh, like she's in the middle of this arena. These are front row seats. Great. But no, she's in shackles. And if he dies, they're lighting her on fire immediately. Like that, the stakes are quite high and rather disturbing.
Yeah. That the whole storyline, it's a great movie. It's entertaining to watch. It's weird to talk about it. Something like that's talking about such a important social issue. It's entertaining to watch, but it's so informative. It's a difficult watch too, right? Mm-hmm. Especially for those scenes, obviously of the rape, but obviously of like just the depiction of how women were treated. And it's interesting too. Or one of the things I loved was like when at one point when Jean de Carouge goes off to a battle and he leaves Marguerite in charge of the estate. And it shows from her perspective is like, oh yeah, she's actually like balancing the books and she's like getting the farm already and like doing all this stuff. And it's like, oh yeah, like let the horses out so that they get the proper exercise and everything. And she's running the estate better than he was.
Yeah. And I love that she has the power to do that too.
Yeah.
She has that power, but then is completely disrespected in every other portion of her life. And it's like, as soon as her husband shows back up, she can't do anything. Right. It's just,
obviously a bit of slut shaming too, where she like gets the dress that's like a bit lower cuts where you can see some cleavage, and he comes back from battle for many months not having seen his wife. Instead of hugging her, he's like, go put some clothes on.
Yeah. He's absolutely offended and disgusted.
Yeah. Again, it's like just hammering home so clear, just the objectification of women and the treating of women as essentially chattel, right? Essentially as, livestock owned by men for the purpose of breeding, and just like how prevalent that was and how that thinking has influenced modern thinking as well, unfortunately, right?
And then the other aspect of Jean's mother living with them, and he treats her with quite a bit of respect. It's like elderly women do get some respect and some power, I guess, in these relationships. And the mother is very cold and hostile towards Marguerite. And at one point, it's just like, the mother's saying, I've been raped before as well. We just can't talk about it. We have to keep going on with our lives, right? Like she's just accepted this is not happening. And Marguerite is like, no, we have to take a stand. If all these women take stands, change can happen, right? But if everyone keeps staying quiet, this is just going to keep propagating.
And that's the sad thing too, is like you look at that, it's like when people consistently, when you're in a society or you're in a situation or you're in that culture or subculture that completely that demeans people and tells you, oh, you're worthless, oh, your only value is carrying children, you start to internalize that, right? And you start to devalue yourself, your self-worth, and your self-value goes down. So it's like it's this self-perpetuating cycles of abuse and objectification and misogyny that get like essentially programmed into not just the men but the women as well, right? And it's a hard cycle to break, and we're still in the midst of, we made progress as a society, but like seeing this movie kind of hold up a mirror to what's going on in that medieval setting, which is based on a book, which is based on a true story, is kind of, it's a sobering thought to think that in the past 500 years, in a lot of ways, we've come, we've taken steps where women, like have the right to vote and they have legal standing in Western society and all this stuff. But at the same time, still worried, genuine concerns when they go out to parties, to work, on the bus. There's a non-0% chance like that they're going to be sexually harassed or sexually assaulted or raped. Things that you and I as men, literally, like I'm never worried about being raped. I've never worried about people groping me on the bus, right? All these little indignities. It's so easy for some people to dismiss, I guess. It's like, oh, he just grabbed your butt when you're on the bus, or just grabbed your breast when you were at work or something. But it's not a little thing, right? It's emblematic of a larger, deeper issue of devaluing people and treating them as objects. And so it was like, as a man specifically, it's really eye-opening to see this and to have somebody like like Ridley Scott's age. I think I think we have to talk about generational shifts, or like somebody at his age who's recognizing this and putting out this work. I think that's very important, because I think part of the resistance to change is these generational shifts where you get men and women of their times. You tend to be a men and women of their times. Right? You grow up being taught a certain thing, and it can be really, really hard to change. So I think there's a certain amount of props to be given to somebody like Ridley Scott, who's in his 70s, 80s, 80 something, 30.
He's probably in his 80s now. Big props to him. And I have to say, like, this is like the second movie we've had written by Matt Damon and Ben Affleck.
Yeah.
I feel like there's some props there where they recognize their shortcomings in the same perspective. All they've had is their male privileged perspective their entire careers. And they need that female perspective. They need that woman to come in and provide that on this movie. And it's like, it's not there just for representation. Like, we're seeing a lot of movies where they're hiring female directors and writers and whatnot to come in to sort of like satisfy that imbalance that's so significant in Hollywood. It's there because the story absolutely depends on having that other perspective in this film, or else it just will not work. And I think it works beautifully because of that.
Well, yeah. And I think this is why I would recommend this film to anybody, not just because it's a well-made film, or not just because it has these important social issues that they're discussing that absolutely need to be discussed and need to be recognized more. And art is a good way to kind of keep this discussion going and keep these things in front of mind, to get us to consider things that we might not have otherwise considered, right? But the fact that it's also this incredibly well-made and well-crafted movie. I think we talked before. I want to talk about like the acting in this, like Matt Damon and Adam Driver and Jodie Comer, obviously, as the main trio, doing like Adam Driver. I mean, I think we can agree that he's one of the best of his generation, right?
Yeah.
Like he's one of the best things about the Star Wars prequels, or not prequels. He's still, even not being in the prequels, he's still one of the best things about the Star Wars prequels. One of the best things about the Star Wars sequels. He's just one of those actors who's great in everything you see him in. He was amazing in this, bringing a lot of nuance to a character that could have easily just been an out and out, like you're saying, mustache twirling villain. Coming in with Matt Damon. Again, bringing a lot of nuance to this character, and he's like, it's a thankless job, because like Adam Driver and Ben Affleck have like more kind of likable characters, but like Sir Jean de Carouge is like, as I think I think Ben Affleck's character Pierre at one point says like he doesn't like the characters, like he's just no fucking fun.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I think Ben Affleck was going to star in Adam Driver's role and took himself out into the supporting role that
Yes.
is arguably like much more lighthearted and almost a bit of comic relief in the film.
Yeah.
It was just like he's kind of absurd and you can have some fun in there. But I also think it was really important. I mean, I'm not dissing Ben Affleck as an actor here, but Adam Driver is a better actor and can handle this role in a better way, I think. And it was just the right choice to have it. It seemed like it was perfectly cast throughout.
I think that's kind of speaking to the maturity of the filmmakers involved. Where like,
Yeah.
I don't know if like would the Ben Affleck of 2000 have turned down that opportunity to be in that spotlight? Not
Never.
specifically Ben
Yeah.
Affleck, but it's like somebody like an A-list actor. Would they have turned down in that early in their career a chance to be there? But it's like, no, taking a step back, realizing it's like, no, this guy's gonna be better for this role and better served for this story, which is an important story to tell. But yeah, all the actors, like I think people were online, you see all these reactions about how Ben Affleck did an amazing job in this. It's like, yeah, he had a great time. He's playing a sleazeball, right?
Yeah,
like, his character's like, he's fun, comic relief, but he's obviously there to show this other side of like why this society is problematic for women, because he's a womanizer and he's demeaning
and he
women.
has significant power in the region, right? Like he's
you can tell like he is like he's chewing the scenery there. And it's great. It's a great performance from him. It's kind of interesting, like from that meta perspective, knowing that Matt Damon and Ben Affleck are friends in real life, to show like Ben Affleck's character hating Matt Damon's character is really just
well, Matt Damon's character it's so interesting. I mean, that's one of the first things you pick up on is he's almost kind of a buffoon, but in his own perspective, like he is.
Yeah, I don't know if he's like a buffoon, but he's not fun and he's not well liked, right?
Well, this is the thing, in his perspective, like he's playing by the book all the time, right? Like he has honor, but from Adam Driver's character's perspective, he's much more buffoonish, right? Like this guy is, we know he's not an actual buffoon or he's not an idiot. It's just like this guy is not cool, essentially. Like he has that perspective. I kind of enjoyed that part of it, but
yeah, like the acting was really great. I want to also talk about like the depiction of some of the medieval armor and battle tactics.
Sure.
Because I think like that Last Duel, just in recent years, I've been doing a lot of research and then about medieval battles and medieval armor and what it would actually be like. So like watching a lot of like pet peeves about like when somebody's wearing armor, especially like full plate armor, and they get like stabbed through the chest or something, like a stab through the chest or something with like a sword and it goes right through their armor like it was doing nothing. It's like in this movie, you actually see the armor and how it would actually work. I think there's one scene where Matt Damon was in a battle and you see the arrows actually bouncing off because he's wearing like full plates on his body, and then he's got like the chainmail on his arms and legs, I think. But it's like that's how armor would actually work. When in the final battle, that final duel, which is so visceral, such a probably the best medieval fight put to screen. I would, or up in the top 3
Easily.
or top 5. But like when you see like they're slashing each other and they're not getting through, they're not landing killing blows. Like you see the swords bouncing off the armor. Doing research, like that's what would actually happen wearing full plate. You can't just like slash somebody, even like a thrust. You're not going to get through full plate armor. It's like when you're getting stabbed, like in the vulnerable parts, like in the joints or like in the leg up there where you don't have as much armor. Where like at one point, Matt Damon's character, Jean de Carouge, he gets stabbed in the leg because he's not armored on his inner thigh.
Yeah.
And that makes sense. I think that was based on history as well, where he actually did get stabbed in the leg during that duel. But you see like how brutal those fights are and how long they can go on because the armor is actually protecting them, right? And I thought that was so neat to show like, yeah, people wore armor because it actually worked.
It worked, and it's heavy and it's exhausting, and you could see the exhaustion. I mean, they start off the duel with like 3 jousting rounds, basically, which has got to do a number on you, on your body right there.
It's the blunt force trauma, man.
And then they get onto the ground battle, and it's like, oh my God, it goes on and on and on. And literally, I don't know the history behind it. I don't know who survives. I don't know what happens here.
Yeah.
It's fully invested in that scene from start to finish. That was wild.
I was leaning forward in my seat because apparently too, like in the actual, from the historical records, what happened was, spoiler alert, Jacques Legree dies. Jean de Carouge lives and so does Marguerite. But in the original, I think in the actual historical fight, according to historical documentation, during the fight, Jacques Legris actually gets tired and he gets weighed down from his armor, so he can't get back up. And apparently Jean de Carouge is on top of him, and he literally has to pry the faceplate off, because in the historical, they're still taking a little bit of liberties because they want to show the actors' faces. Yeah. But like in the actual historical fight, Jean de Carouge is actually taking a dagger to pry the faceplate off of his of Jacques' helmet so that he can actually land the killing blow. But yeah, it's like, it was really neat to see like the brutality of that, or like even Matt Damon holding like the hilt of the sword, and he was holding the sword like kind of halfway down. Whereas like that's an actual, I can't remember the name of that. I would encourage people to go look at these HEMA videos, like the medieval European martial arts videos, where they talk about different grips and different techniques. And it's like, that's an actual technique that they would use with swords, like using it, like holding it like the mid grip, because you have a gauntlet. You're not going to cut yourself on that sword, right? So you can use it in different ways. And I think like that last battle, oh my God, that was like a movie in and of itself.
And honestly, like, I wouldn't be surprised if Ridley Scott, I mean, he has lots of experience filming medieval battles. And it's a nice change of pace because this is a one-on-one fight.
Exactly.
With his technical craftsmanship. And he's probably bringing on a lot of people he knows and has accumulated over the past 20 plus years who can properly depict such a fight and add the suspense and everything to it. It was crazy, right to the final blow, which is quite nasty and pretty gory, but man, wow, what a ride that was.
Oh my God. Yeah. The back, just watching it again, watching that fight scene, that made me want to go back and rewatch Gladiator and Kingdom of Heaven and Robin Hood. Not because like, I think he's still very anachronistic. Like, he's showing the actual full scale battles as like just giant melees or people like running into each other. It's like, no, you actually have to hold your line, because as soon as you break your line, that's when you get killed. So like all these battles are like, it's Hollywood style battles.
This is probably the most realistic one, Ben, in that case, because literally it's going to be one-on-one and you're going to have spectators watching, and that's it.
Yeah. And I love to see that. And I'm looking forward to the video breakdowns online of some of my favorite YouTubers out there who I wish I could remember the names right now, because there's a couple I'm seeing very clearly. I'm going to post this somewhere on the blog or something when I write it, when I do a write up of this movie. But just to see those breakdowns of like what's accurate and what's inaccurate. But like, that duel was so visceral. And it's like, I specifically didn't read up on the history beforehand, because I didn't want that suspense. But it was so back and forth with like, they would get a little injury, and it's like, and like they were talking about, that guy's probably going to bleed out. And it's like, that's an actual concern, because he got stabbed in the thigh. It's like, there's a bunch of major arteries around there.
Yeah. Well, that was almost a turning point. I was like, oh my goodness. Yeah. Matt Damon is going to lose this battle here. And then things changed.
Well, apparently historically, I think Jacques Legris was actually favored to win that fight in the actual historical outcome. I think earlier in the film, it showed like, Matt Damon's character, Jean de Carouge, he came back from somewhere and he had he was a fever and he was sick. I think in the actual historical events, he was actually had the flu. He was sick during the fight. So he was sick. He was going into it sick. He's going into it. I think his opponent was favored to win based on skill and size and strength and everything. So he was going into that as like a true underdog. But like in the movie, it's shown kind of more even, but like Matt Damon's character is shown, he's shown as a beast in that movie through both perspectives. Like when he's dressed up in the medieval armor and he's got the medieval mullet going on, he's got the scar on his face and everything. Like he looks like he's genuinely frightening to look at. Like he looked like just like a monster almost coming at you.
So with all that being said and kind of going forward there, what are you landing on for a star rating on this? You know, we rate our movies out of 5 stars. What is your first instinct of a star rating here?
Right. So I was watching this movie. Obviously it's very important from a cultural kind of social standpoint, and the things it's discussing and things and the topics about, women's issues and, sexual assault and sexual harassment that are so important. And then looking at, the craft of the actual filmmaking. I think I initially gave it, my gut reaction was like a 3.5 out of 5. I think I may have just, in talking to you, talked myself up to a 4 out of 5.
The podcast effect has just bumped it up a little bit.
A little bit, yeah. So like in the 3.5 to 4 range. I mean, it was an important movie, talking about very important things. Do I think it's Ridley Scott's best work? I don't think so. but I think it's a very well-made, well-crafted film, socially important, well-made film, well-acted film. And the more I think about it, and the little details, I think I may boost that up to a 4 out of 5. How about you?
My first thought, I immediately after watching the movie, I dropped in a 4.5 out of 5 stars on this film. I really enjoyed it. It really blew me away. And I don't know if it's been so long since I've seen like just a classically good film from Ridley Scott, but I love the commentary, the social issues the film was touching on. I loved the way it was structured. Like you said, the title cards, the truth according to so-and-so, or just, what was it again? The
truth according to Jean de Carouge. I love saying these names in French.
Yeah. And it's just like seeing those. I was into the structure. I was into the acting, the action on scene, absolutely everything about this movie. Maybe it gets a 5 stars. I don't know. It's difficult to dish out a 5-star, but I really look forward to watching this again soon. And I mean, we got to mention collecting movies. Like this is definitely going to be a purchased movie on
100%.
4K or whatever format it lands on.
Like I'm closing my eyes, envisioning like the cover of the 4K. I don't know it even exists yet, but like the artwork, I have my own mind with like the black 4K label across the top.
Is there anything else you want to drop about this film before we kind of wrap this up? Like, I mean, 3.5, 4.5 stars. This is a good film. Like I
think we're landing around 4 or 4.5 mark here, I think.
Yep. And I mean, I have to recommend the movie to everybody, of course. I think it's great and definitely worthwhile. If you're scared of the runtime, don't be. 2.5 hours is nothing really for a film like this. It has a really nice, easy clip of a pace.
Yeah, 100% would recommend.
That's a wrap on another episode of the Reel Film Chronicles podcast. Thank you for listening and hanging out with us today. We really appreciate your support and look forward to you joining us for the next episode. We can be found around the internet and social media, with our home base being reelfilmchronicles.com, which will have all the links you need to follow and keep in touch with us. If you have a moment, we'd really appreciate if you could leave some feedback, such as a rating on Apple Podcasts or on whatever platform you're listening on. And feel free to send us an email to reelfilmchronicles@outlook.com. We love some suggestions, questions, or general comments and would enjoy including them on an upcoming episode. Until next time, take care of yourself and others and keep your film journey going.